I think we can get started now. So, good morning, everyone. For us, it is afternoon, but good morning to everyone back in the UK. And thank you very much for taking the time off and joining us today for this webinar, which is essentially going to be focusing on opportunities in the construction sector and the infrastructure sector. So we have a great lineup of speakers here today who will be covering various aspects of the sector, from opportunities to considerations to bear in mind for a new exporter, as well as seasoned ones. We're also going to be talking about a UKEF opportunity in the UAE, and we get to hear from a seasoned exporter to the UAE who has been trading in the regions for a few years now. So, without further delay, a few ground rules. All the participants will be in listen-in mode. So to ask a question, please type into the question box, and we will be answering the questions either at the end of every session by one of the speakers or towards the very end of the presentations itself. This is going to be a 1 hour webinar, and if the, I mean, but we do expect a slight sort of spillover if there are way too many questions that need to be answered. And if it does spill over a little too much, then what we will do is we will collate some of those questions and provide all of the answers when we send the link for the recording of this webinar to all those who had registered for this webinar. So without further delay, I just want to kick off now. Of course, the big C word, with the big C word that's on everybody's mind these days. Thankfully, like I was having a discussion with one of the panelists earlier, just before we started off, the UAE has done not so bad for itself, as a matter of fact. So as of 3rd November, we have been at 1,000+ cases, which is reasonably big for a tiny country like the UAE. However, our fatalities rate has been pretty good. We are at a little over 500 so far, which is encouraging for the ones who have survived it, obviously. More than 13 million tests done. As you can see, the population is just 9.8 million, but obviously there's a lot of us that are beginning to travel now. So, take that into consideration, plus all of the repeat tests that are taking place. Again, the country has handled the situation well in that the healthcare here has been pretty up to the mark. I mean, there's been no, um, you know, PPE equipment and key equipment have been really been available here, and again, life has very much gone back to normalcy. Thankfully, we haven't had severe cases of lockdown in this part of the world. So, many of us are already well into staycations here, though we haven't been able to travel to all the nice places that we would otherwise have liked to. So with that, I will now sort of run you through what the running order of today's event looks like. So we will start with an overview of the BCB by Joe, and we will then move on to the sector overview with Colin from Mead. And we, after that, would come in Nick from Taylor Wessing, who would take us through to some of the routes to market and export considerations. From that, on to Peter, who is one of the seasoned exporters I was referring to earlier when I started off. And then we wind up the session with Rashid from the Department for International Trade here in the UAE, where Rashid will be discussing about a current UKEF opportunity that's ongoing, and that's very much a live project where all the exporters can look to be a part of potentially. And we will then open the floor to a Q&A session, which is where we will be discussing the questions. So on to you now, Joe, who will be our first speaker, CEO of BCB, my boss as well. And Joe, on to you. Joe's been with the BCB right from essentially the founder of the BCB. So we've been at it since 2013 now. So, reasonable experience, partners for the DIT. Over to you now, Joe.
Thanks. Thank you, Vanita, and thank you for organising this event. I think I've seen we've got 120 participants there, which is excellent. I think it's testament to the interest, the UK UAE interest here. Thank you also to our other speakers who are joining and have given up their time today. Next slide, Abby, please. So we are the BCB, we're the British Centres for Business. There's 12 of us here based in Dubai, from where we cover the UAE and the wider region. We cover all sectors, including obviously the one we're talking about here. And I think the makeup of our team is quite representative of the UAE in terms of the sort of multinational, multicultural, multilingual group that we are. So you know, we're able to cover the region from that aspect as well. Next slide, Abby. We've been working with DIT since we started in 2013. And then since about, you know, a couple of years after that, we've been responsible for working with UKTI, then DIT now, in terms of delivery, particularly on the SME end of the market, for issues around market entry, research, support, setup, exporting advice. So we've done almost 100 million. I think I can almost say that now. We're probably more like 95 after the last month of export wins. Helped in altogether more than 350 exporters, helped another 45 set up here. And we've done a lot of work with the IT on trade missions, which actually is where this would have probably been had Big Five been happening at, you know, this time of year as a physical session. And we've worked with DIT in particular, I think Midlands Engine in the last couple of years with that. And hello to the advisors from Midlands Engine. Next one, Abby. And we're part of quite a large ecosystem here, and some of whom are on here with Rashid and the DIT team, where there's a real network of support that you can tap into here, and goodwill from wherever you are in the UK. All of the devolved authorities are represented here. There's entities like the British Business Group in Dubai and Abu Dhabi who are very active. Private sector companies like Santander and some of the other big banks, all of whom we work with and we would recommend you work with, because there's a great deal of expertise, goodwill and support that's available to you. When we started in 2013, it was around a business incubator that we developed, a sort of a market entry incubator, not necessarily for startups, but for UK companies coming in. Dubai government loves what we do there because it's a catalyst for skills, knowledge, technical transfer. And we've had a number of companies in the construction and sort of construction tech space have come in that way, and it's really a sort of a market leading product. We're now a certified incubator under the Dubai SME division of the economic department, and that's something that goes from strength to strength. Couple of our just some more features on that, in terms of it gives you a 5-year sort of soft landing here. We set you up as a foreign branch, so you are 100% UK owned and managed, and there's no issues there. And we take care of a lot of the bureaucracy and admin and paperwork, allowing you to get on and do your business. The other thing we do is often more common in the construction and infrastructure sector, is around helping you with general exporting issues, be that market studies and research, finding out who to talk to, resellers, agents, distributors, introductions in the market, regulatory work, and you know, that will work with somebody like Taylor Wessing in order to get that right. So that whole sort of spectrum of commercial exporting questions and issues that you might face over the course of your exporting career, if you like, in the UAE, we can manage, and we do manage, and take that on and look after that for you. We've done quite a lot of work in this sector, and I'm pleased to see K-Form on the call, because they're one of their success stories, and we've played a small part in that. But construction has been a growing sector for us. I think we've probably seen a change in the manner of construction companies, and I think we'll that will be talked about in the webinar today. And we've got a good relationship with a lot of the prime developers, main contractors, consultants, some of the top of the supply chain that you'd probably want to be talking to and connecting with here. couple of case studies here. I won't read it word for word, but there was a nice one here where we helped this company Nico, sort of fittings and clasps, generate 1.7 million pounds, not dirhams, pounds worth of export wins due from introductions and support we made. And another one, I mean, more on the landscaping side, but still in the wider sector. Lighting for gardens was one where we were getting them into the whole landscaping sector, and successfully introduced them to a number of potential agents, distributors, got them into procurement channels with RFPs and tenders, and again, it was a successful outcome for them. Just briefly, I mean, we're here in the UAE. We need to update this map because we can now deal with Israel, and we can talk about that. And we've actually started doing our own, with first Israeli projects. The relevance for you that is there is that from the UAE you can now access Israel. Obviously, that's a very new thing. But we're part of a bigger group around the world, and we can help you in all of the geographies that you can see on your screen. We do this for DIT similarly in North America as we do here. So there's a whole global network of support that we can provide you with. I'm handing back to Vanita now. Thank you very much. We've got the numbers have gone up to 127. I think this has been our best webinar since we all started doing this. So thank you for attending, and we look forward to helping you in future.
All right. Thanks very much, Joe, for that. I mean, that was for everyone. That was essentially an overview of the BCB, who we are. I mean, how we got involved to begin with. We are essentially the delivery partners for the DIT. And as Joe mentioned, there's very many routes to market, right from for the ones who are testing waters all the way through to someone who is now wanting to understand very, very quickly, okay, we see some opportunities, but we want to set up, and that's where we can again step in with one of our incubator offerings. I would now like to move on to our next speaker, who is Colin. Colin Foreman is the deputy editor with Mead, one of the most prominent trade publications here within the construction sector. And Colin will be speaking to us and giving us a realistic view of what we're seeing within the construction and infrastructure sector, because trust me, journalists know everything much more than we can ever dream of knowing. So over to you now, Colin.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. If you could put my slides up, that would help me just as a prompt. Yeah, I'm going to speak to you today. I'll run through the slides quickly. You know who I am, and that's an image there of a new project that's being built at the moment, which is called One Zabir, which is quite a complex structure, which has got a bridge being lifted over which has been lifted over a highway now as part of the structure. So just an example of a current project in the UAE or in Dubai that's going on, which is capturing the imagination and another sort of architectural landmark for the city. So if you could pass to the next slide, please. I think it's important just to start off just as a little bit of sort of historical context, just for people who might not be familiar with the market. That's a photo, not a very good photo because I took it myself, but I took that last weekend. And just for perspective, pretty much every single structure that you see in that photo wasn't there 15, 16 years ago. So it just gives you an idea of the scale of construction that has been going on here for the last 15 years or so. And it's really been a key driver for economic growth. And there's a lot of business has obviously been created by that, not just in contracting, consultants, suppliers, but also all sorts of other add-on industries that service those activities. So it's really been a main part of the Dubai and the UAE economy for quite some time. What it's done as well is the initial phase of projects that came through around 20 years ago sort of captured the imagination, brought in a lot of investment and freehold real estate, meant people could buy property here for the first time, and that really lit the touch paper for a lot of construction. So there's been a lot of investment. So unlike a lot of other markets in this region and internationally, there's a very active private sector and private sector investors involved in developing projects, but at the same time there's still the government involvement and the sort of infamous government related companies that build a lot of things, and they're still quite active. Normally what they tend to do is put in some infrastructure and then maybe take on a few of the key buildings or the key assets within a major development, and then allow the private sector to come in and do the rest. If we move to the next slide, it's quite interesting where we are at the moment. I think most people would agree this has been a difficult year, and it's been a difficult year for construction in the UAE and Dubai as well. I don't think that's really a surprise. The market for me turned about 2 years ago, and it turned for a couple of reasons. There was a slowdown in the amount of work that was being awarded. I think that was again, for several reasons. One, you had a peak of work that was being awarded for the Expo, and obviously that was needed to be ready for 2020 when it was awarded. Now the Expo has been shifted to 2021. So that meant that a lot of things were moving into the delivery phase, so there was a slowdown in awards. But at the same time, there was also a lot of work being completed, which meant that in terms of whether the market was growing or shrinking, the market started to shrink a little bit. So you started to hear of people scaling back and withdrawing or scaling back operations. And that's shown in the data. If you look, if you can see it, there's a chart there on the bottom right, which just gives you a feel for, it's the number of contract awards and with the contract completions subtracted from it. So you just get an idea of, on a macro level, what the net gain is for the sector in Dubai. So from the graph, you can see 2008 was a very, very, very big peak. And then from about 2012, we had growth up till sort of the end of 2017. And since then, we've been heading into what you could argue is a recessionary period. If we can stay on that slide, sorry. I think what we've seen over the last couple of years as the trading conditions have become more difficult is we've seen at I would say at the leading edge of the supply chain, you've seen consultants repositioning what their businesses look like. So the consultants have typically been looking at projects in other markets, notably Saudi Arabia. And then they've been, due to sort of margin pressure and cost pressure, they've been looking at other types of work than they traditionally looked at. A lot of people who are generally doing sort of quite a lot of design work started moving more towards project management and advisory type work. So there's been a shift on the consultancy side, and slightly more recently, the main contractor space has changed quite a lot as well. So in UK context, people like Balfour Beatty sold their share in a local entity that was here, and other UK contractors have scaled back or withdrawn their presence here. So there's been a shift in the equilibrium between the sort of supply of contractors, and as there's been less work, there's been a shrink in demand there. So that's meant there's quite a bit of uncertainty in the markets at the moment, and that's been made even worse by what's been going on with COVID-19 and the uncertainty at the moment. So it's quite a difficult spot for construction at the moment, and there's a few high-profile local companies here which are in quite considerable financial stress. The largest being a company called Arab Tech, who are going through the process of liquidating at the moment, and we need to see what will happen with that. But that's a major concern for the industry going forward. We then move to the next slide. So that's sort of where we are today. Looking ahead, what do we look for in Dubai and the UAE? If we're talking about Dubai on its own, we've really got a lot of work to be finished. There's still, Expo was meant to be happening at the moment. That's been postponed, so there's still quite a lot of work just to finish that off. There's also work ongoing with power plants and other infrastructure projects, and still quite a lot of building work that needs to be finished. One thing I've noticed anecdotally, and you can hear this speaking to people, there's quite a lot of emphasis now being put on upgrading civic areas. So there's a lot of landscaping work and a lot of just tidying up things. I think there's a real feeling that they need to get that expo looking very, very good next year. So all around town, you'll notice there's quite a lot of beautification type works going on and municipal work. And I expect that to continue. If we look at what happened previously in downturns after the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9, there was a great emphasis put on investing in projects that aren't necessarily big ticket projects, but they do a lot to improve people's quality of life and have a real solid payback. So I think that will be a trend that is being started by what's happening with the expo, but I expect that to carry on for the next couple of years. For bigger stuff going forward, I think the thing that's being talked about a lot is the public-private partnership model. In Dubai, they've been talking about this for quite some time. They're now using it for a power plant at Hasyan, and they've been using it for a couple of other power and water schemes. I think that's a tried and tested sector for using PPP. There's a guaranteed offtake, and people are fairly happy with how PPP works in power and water. The big question is going to be how that works in other sectors. There's been a couple of attempts with a car park for a court building and a couple of other forays into the PPP market, which haven't really worked that well. I think if they can crack that nut, that's quite an important thing to happen going forward, but we just need to wait and see a little bit as to what happens there. The other big thing that's very important for the market just in general is that what's happening with the airport. So at the moment, there's a lot less flights going through the airport, which has an economic impact. But from a construction point of view, there's a very big new airport that's been talked about, or very big airport expansion at Al Maktoum Airport in Jebel Ali, which is the smaller of Dubai's airports at the moment. But that will be pretty much the largest airport in the world if it does go ahead. There's a school of thought now that, given what's happening with the aviation industry at the moment, the focus will shift, that project will be put on hold for a while, and they'll expand Dubai International Airport instead. And then there's a few other major projects floating around, sort of hotels, sewage tunnels, and the like. So overall, I think there's not going to be as much work as there had been up until about 2017, but there are things that will be going ahead, and they seem to be the areas to look out for. We move on to the next slide. I think it's also important to say that Dubai is really quite a hub for a number of things. There's industrial areas where things get exported from, or manufactured and exported, or imported into and re-exported, and also a lot of the sort of consultancy and all sorts of other things like law firms and everything have a base here in Dubai and service the rest of the region. So the rest of the region is really quite important for Dubai's broader construction industry. In Abu Dhabi, there's a lot of investment that's still going through. Abu Dhabi's got a much stronger financial base than Dubai, and they're investing quite a lot in social infrastructure, housing and cultural assets, as well as obviously the oil and gas sector, which we class as being slightly different to construction, but there's a lot of construction work related to that. And looking further afield, I would say the biggest market in the region going forward, probably for the next 5 years at least, will be Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of activity on the design side and planning side in Saudi Arabia at the moment, and that's really started to come into construction this year. So I think that will be the big story for the region over the next 5 years, and there's an awful lot of projects, an awful lot going on. So that's really quite an exciting thing to report on at the moment. In Qatar, also some project activity, not as much as there has been in the past, but big one in Qatar is a gas field expansion, which could catalyze the market there a little bit further. And then the smaller markets in the GCC, just to round them off, Kuwait, Oman and Bahrain, really not as much activity. And again, in a similar way to Dubai, quite a focus on the PPP and private sector involvement going forward as government budgets are put under stress. So that's sort of where we see the construction market going forward. I think UAE, there'll still be opportunities, but it's a difficult period for the next few years. And really the big thing to look for on a regional point of view is Saudi Arabia. And I'll be here at the end, so if people have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you very much, Colin, for that. I mean, you briefly touched on PPP, and I think that's one of the questions, as a matter of fact, we had earlier in the webinar. I have a question here from John Davey, who says they're quite interested in entering the market, but there have been barriers to UK companies. And for those UK companies who are looking to enter the market, to engage in PPP partnerships in the UAE, what are some of the things that you think that they need to be on the lookout for?
In what engaged in what capacity? As an investor, a supplier? Does he say?
Well, it doesn't say here, but
I mean, I think the thing that's been difficult with PPPs over the last decade really has been the allocation of risk, and the feeling has been that the government party hasn't really understood truly sharing the risk with the private sector, and has passed a lot of the risk on, and that's made the private sector not really be interested in what's on offer. I think that will inevitably have to change. I think in the past there wasn't a great need to use the PPP model, and I think as that need becomes more of a necessity, I think there will be more willingness to apportion risk more appropriately for investors. But that's going to be one of the tricky things going forward.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Colin. And you know, just to wrap up on a couple of points there. Yes, I mean, it's obviously not all you know, nice and rosy. Definitely not in the construction sector here in the UAE. Arab Tech, again, a really big, huge, prominent entity in this part of the world, now liquidating. But that will inadvertently have a ripple effect on the sector itself. You know, in that, you know, we will see a lot of suppliers, as a matter of fact, fold and leave in all likelihood in this part of the world. But that also opens up a fair amount of opportunities for new suppliers who are looking to enter the market, and perhaps that's you know, another way of looking at things. So thanks for that, Colin. With that, we will move to the next segment, which is where I'm going to invite Nick for this. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about, if you're a new or a you know, exporter looking to the UAE or the region itself as a potential export market, then Nick is here from Taylor Wessing, again a very prominent law firm. With a good footprint back in the UK and here in the UAE as well. And he will be talking about some of the considerations that you need to bear in mind, and some of the, you know, the structures that the UAE provides if you're looking to set up here in the UAE in the near future. So over to you now, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for bringing up my slides, Abby. My name's Nick Carnell. I am an English qualified solicitor, and I am a partner in a law firm called Taylor Wessing. I've been here for the last 14 and a half years, and I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about two things, really. I'm going to take a very brief run through legal structures which are available for entrance into the UAE market, and then I'm going to touch very briefly on what happens if, having entered the market, you find yourselves getting into trouble. Starting with the first of those, there are three real ways in which someone can set up business in the UAE. The first and most common of those, and particularly prominent for construction companies, is as a mainland onshore company, an LLC as they're referred to, registered with the Department of Economic Development. And this is going to be applicable for the great majority of entrants, particularly in the construction field. The second, of course, are free zone companies. Free zones are economic areas where businesses can maintain a full foreign ownership without the need to have any local participation. This is relatively in the construction, although a number of consultants and a number of specialist suppliers do use this route. The third is offshore companies, generally speaking, where a company retains foreign ownership. Sorry, apparently I'm being told the slide seems to be stuck. I wonder if Abby can move on. So, excellent. Thank you, Abby. The third is offshore companies, which are mainly established as holding companies, don't require office space in the UAE, and generally managed from outside the UAE. Abby, can you move to the next slide, please? Three real types of corporate business: limited liability companies. Important point here to note is 51% local ownership is required. In most instances, there is a non-participation agreement whereby the local participant doesn't actually play any part in the day-to-day running of the company. Secondly, you have branches of foreign companies. This is a popular business model. They allow 100% foreign ownership. They do require a local service agent, but the level of local participation is obviously less. Thirdly, sole proprietorships, in other words, single person businesses. Abby, next slide. I'm not going to talk about LLC ownership and management requirements. I think you'll all get the slides afterwards, but this just sets out what the requirements are. In most instances, certainly in the construction field, you are going to be a local onshore company, will require, as I say, 51% local ownership, and albeit that those local owners tend not to play a particular part in the day-to-day running of the company. The next slide, please, which is simply a list of free zones in the UAE, unlikely to be of great significance so far as the construction sector is concerned, except if you are operating in the fields of design, or you are in a particularly specialist area of endeavour. Particularly Dubai Multi-Commodities Centre, if you happen to be, for example, a specialist supplier, you happen to be into the installation of specialist architectural products, then DMCC is often the place where you will register. Most onshore construction companies, as I say, will register in the conventional way as LLCs registered by the Department of Economic Development, and free zones for that reason will not be of particular concern to you. If you are in one of the areas for which free zones particularly cater, you will find that there are certain advantages. It's particularly in terms of ease of setting up. Next and last slide in this section concerns tax in the UAE. One of the popular misnomers of the UAE is the suggestion that there is no personal taxation and no corporate taxation. Certainly it's the case that with the exception of VAT, which was introduced at the start of 2017 at a rate of 5%, there is no direct taxation. There are, however, a number of indirect taxes, particularly on certain goods, certain services, and do be particularly alert to the VAT regulations within the UAE, which are not particularly complex, but they will catch out the unwary. They are not quite the same as those applicable in the UK, so care does need to be avoided. I'm happy to answer any questions about company setup, but I'd like to take the second half of my allotted time talking about the UAE legal system. It's not uncommon for entrance into the market, particularly at the moment when economic conditions are challenging, to find themselves getting into disputes in the construction sector. Those tend to be what one might describe as the classics. They are the traditional problems: time, quality, payment. Issues surrounding payments, particularly at the moment, are extremely prevalent. I think it follows from Colin's interesting remarks of a few minutes ago that it's very, very common to find too many people chasing too little money. And certainly the idea of projects getting themselves into financial difficulties, contractors essentially seeking to buy work, jobs being underbid and being bid at very, very low rates of return are frankly all too common. But anyway, the UAE legal system, onshore, it's a civil law system. That is very different from what we have in the UK, or at any rate from what we have in England and Wales. One should never be rude about the Scots. The UAE legal system derives from the Egyptian civil code, which in turn derives from the Code Napoleon, and it is a civil law code. Most of the important provisions are codified in the UAE Civil Transactions Law, the catchily named Law Number 5 of 1984. You can move on, please, Abby. The court system has 3 tiers: a court of first instance, a court of appeal, and what's called a court of cassation, which for practical purposes is a supreme court. Proceedings are in Arabic. That means that if the documents on your project are in English, you will need to get them translated. Hearings tend to be very brief processes at which the local court advocates turn up, deliver a written memorandum and a bundle of documents. There will be successive rounds of submissions. There tends to be little or no oral evidence. Witnesses are not cross-examined. There is very little by the way of oral submissions. And the process of making successive submissions continues essentially till the judges conclude that they have enough information on which to make a decision. Now, great reliance is placed on court experts. They are, as the name suggests, appointed by the court. They produce reports. Those reports quite often get rubber stamped by the court. And in essence, the process of placing excessive reliance on court experts is responsible for well, most of the troubles in the court system. However, on the plus side, the UAE court system is an increasingly effective way for enforcement of simple debt matters by way of payment orders, travel bans, and precautionary attachments. Now, while it may not seem much of a threat in times of restricted travel, the idea that you have your passport taken away and you as a director of a company are prevented from travel can be quite an effective tool. And in addition to the local courts, next slide please, we also have DIFC courts. Created some 14 years ago, this is an English-style common law system. The idea being much business in this country is conducted in English by English-speaking businessmen. A court system with a procedure identical or nearly identical to England and Wales was thought desirable. It has a limited jurisdiction. There is a limited opt-in, but otherwise it does have a fairly confined reach. There are 5 jurisdictional gateways, largely limited to transactions within DIFC or businesses conducting work in DIFC. However, the important point is that their judgments are enforceable within onshore Dubai. Next, please, Abby. The other thing you need to be aware of, there is an equivalent DIFC in Abu Dhabi. It is called Abu Dhabi Global Markets Free Zone. It again has its own court system. I don't think we need to trouble further with that. Let's move on and talk in the next slide about arbitration. International businesses doing business in the region, arbitration is still the chosen method of dispute resolution. There are 3 well-known arbitration centres in the region: DIAC, which is Dubai International Arbitration Centre, DIFC LCIA, which is associated with the London Court of International Arbitration, London, and the Abu Dhabi Commercial Conciliation and Arbitration Centre. Well, I'm not going to say anything rude about the Abu Dhabi Commercial Conciliation and Arbitration Centre. They get a lot of work in Abu Dhabi. One will also see a great many disputes dealt with under the rules of the ICC or the LCIA, and sometimes even other arbitration centres like SIAC. They each have their own set of procedural rules. There are a number of very experienced arbitration practitioners in the UAE, and there are also a number of the key service providers. The UAE has been at the vanguard of remote hearings. Next, please, which is my penultimate slide. The only thing you need to know about enforcement is that increasingly Dubai, as an arbitration-friendly venue, has seen arbitration awards enforced, both by DIFC courts and by the onshore courts. The UAE courts can and do enforce foreign awards. Let's finally move on to key takeaways, because I'm 15 seconds over my allotted time. Setting up business in the UK is still closely regulated. The process is getting easier. It used to be said setting up in Dubai was extremely bureaucratic and extremely hard work. There are still hurdles to overcome. Let's not beat about the bush, but those are increasingly manageable. UAE government seeking to encourage participation of foreign entities. The legal system is established, still relatively young, does have regard to due process, and the court system is very much geared towards providing a comprehensive range of ways in which disputes can be addressed. And that is all I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that overview on, the sort of separate structures that are provided by the UAE government if you wanted to set up here. I think I also want to raise an important point that the UAE government, if the companies are looking to enter into agreements with UAE government, it is becoming increasingly important as what we call as ICV, or in-country value, which essentially means that the UAE government encourages a lot of companies to set up here locally, which is essentially their way of ensuring foreign direct investment to a certain extent. But it also means that they want to push UAE forward as a knowledge hub in several different sectors. So this is one practice that they are pushing through the different sectors, including construction. I'm going to quickly take a few questions here, and hopefully we shall have time to take a few more questions toward the end of all the sessions. So there's a couple of questions here for the BCB. I can take that. We have a question here asking us about what our services cost. So again, it purely depends on the scope of service and the type of service that you would avail, and happy to have the discussion in a slightly detailed manner offline. It also has asked, somebody has also asked if it's possible to get contact details of the BCB. Definitely, we will be displaying contact details of all the speakers at the end of this session. But we will also be circulating, like I mentioned earlier, the recording of the session. So you will still get all of our contact details in that. And moving on, I would like to now invite my next speaker, Peter. He's the managing director for KFORM. You may have not missed KFORM as one of our case studies because KFORM has been trading in the region for a few years now, and exceptionally well, might I add. I personally actually made the introduction to their current partner here in the UAE, and I've always heard great things from the local company about KFORM. It only goes to show that it's a highly collaborative affair. And I wanted to invite Peter to talk us through why did they decide to enter the UAE market to begin with, and what has the journey been like over the last few years. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Benita. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Pete Jacob, director of KFORM. So my background is construction, specifically the concrete slab forming, placing and finishing. So in my years of carrying out the forming and placing of concrete slabs, one of the biggest bugbears that I had with this process was the need for expansion joints to be placed within a slab, therefore eliminating cracking and faults due to temperature fluctuations and movement in the slab. And it was a real bugbear because it limited the amount of concrete you could actually place in a day. And you tended to find that pouring concrete slabs is pretty much half a day at a time, because you literally can't go past where the joint is. So I decided that what I needed was a joint that can remain in there and form part of the levelling system. That would mean you could pour limitless bays straight one after the other. And I couldn't find anything on the market, so basically sat and designed it myself, got a company to extrude it, produced a few small pieces for trials, and it went from there. When I introduced it into my company and my projects, immediately we noticed a 30% drop in the cost of producing a slab, mainly due to time and labour costs within the project. So initially, I only ever intended that it would be produced for my own contracts. But after a while, I decided that, well, perhaps I'd better get out of the concreting game and try selling K-form as a product. So that started in the late 2000s, back 2008, 2009, and we got patent protection on the product and went about developing the domestic market. That went really, really well. And within a very, very short time, we were selling in the region of 15 to 20,000 linear meters every month in the UK. Then in about 2012, I decided to be brave, let's try the export market. And initially I was very naive and I just went into areas that were English speaking, purely because I had no language skills. And we set up relatively successful partnerships in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and the USA. They were all building nice and slowly. The UK market had gone from strength to strength. By this point, we were up to about 30,000 linear meters a month. And I had a meeting with the DIT in Wales. And they suggested that perhaps the UAE was a strong growth market and we should look at it. So we decided to give it a go, and they introduced me to Vinitha and BCB, and they identified a selection of potential trade-in partners that we could use as stocking distributors around the UAE. And I went out, met Vinitha, and was taken to the meetings, escorted to them, and the doors were opened for me. And one of the companies we met was a company called Al Sharawi. It's a very big family Emirati-owned company, and they had an absolutely wonderful synergy with our product, in that they were the biggest manufacturer of reinforcing mesh for concrete slabs in the GCC region. So obviously their customer base is exactly what we wanted. We teamed up with them, and that was about 3 years ago now. We've done a few exhibitions which have been jointly funded by ourselves and Al Sharawi. And we found some really good growth, especially over the last 18 months, I would say. It's really started to pick up. And last year, their spend with us was somewhere between 350, 400,000 pounds, and very welcome business. What I would say is it's an absolutely colossal market in construction terms. It absolutely opened my eyes. And an average order for our product from a contractor in the UK or most other export countries is between 500 and 1,000 linear meters per order. And within 12 months, we were actually getting orders coming in of 5,000 linear meters, 20,000. We recently did Carillion, sorry, not Carillion anymore. I can't remember the name of them, but they did the IKEA cube, and that was an order for about 22,000 linear meters. The orders are absolutely massive, but they're extremely difficult to win. You really, really have to work at them. And we've got a very good sales representative out there, a young Indian lad, a Sicilian. He's very good. And I work with him as closely as I can, and we're in constant contact. I'm helping him to sort of get the deals tipped over the edge and get them in place. I think for anybody considering the UAE as an export market, from my experience, I wouldn't want to go alone. I think the doors would be far too difficult to get open, and to be teamed up with the BCB and the British Embassy staff in Dubai, it certainly pushed the doors open and made it a lot easier to get in front of the right people. The next point I'd make is probably going to lead to a question to some of the other panelists, in that I found it essential to have face-to-face contact meetings in the early stages. Now, I don't know how that's functioning now in terms of the COVID situation, and perhaps we could ask somebody to throw something in at the end there of how it's changed it. Another point is, it absolutely shocked me the payment terms that seem to be acceptable within the UAE. And I think it's essential to partner, if you're going to partner up with a distributor, to actually find one that's financially sound and stable enough to support your cash flow, because 120, 150-day payment terms don't seem uncommon. And that, to me, as in my business, would be catastrophe. I just couldn't handle it. I think, and a final point, I suppose, when I was over there, it always seems that the meetings become a social affair, and it does seem to be important to them that after a meeting, they will either take you for lunch or dinner. And it does seem to be frowned upon if you don't socialise and turn it into a bit of a social gathering. And overall, I found it a really, really good process, and it's turned into one of our better export markets. It's been a good experience. Back over to you, Anita.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Peter. I mean, I like that interesting comment that you made about meetings turning into a social affair at the end of it. And that's exactly how things were pre-COVID. I mean, when you go into a meeting, and I always brief companies that we work with closely, that, be prepared to have the several different sips of coffee or tea or dates, or whatever it is that is offered to you. It is considered rude to a certain extent to actually say no. So yeah, I mean that's some of the sort of cultural nuances that you have to bear in mind when you go in for meetings here. How has that changed in the recent past? Well, I mean, obviously, COVID has curtailed our travel plans all over the world, really. So companies here are far more open to having those sort of virtual meetings now. But having said that, obviously, the ones who already have come in prior to COVID times have a distinct advantage of having already built that relationship with face-to-face meetings. So that culture is not going to go away very, very quickly. But I must say that the companies, local companies here in the UAE, local partners here in the UAE, are trying to do things differently, and trying to adjust to the new ways of doing business, just like all of us all across the world are. So with that, I mean, I do have quite a few questions pouring in, and we will try and take as many as we can towards the end of the session. But I will now invite Rashid as our next speaker, who is going to talk about one of the prominent UKEF UK Export Fund projects that is currently a reasonably big opportunity here in the UAE. Rashid essentially account manages the contractor who's working on this project, and he is best placed to talk to you about this particular project. And Rashid obviously is one of the most seasoned trade advisors within the Department for International Trade, stationed here within the British Embassy. Over to you now, Rashid.
Thank you very much, Vinita, and I hope everyone can hear. Good morning to all, and as Vinita has stated, I'm supported by the structure of presentation around a live project which is backed by.
Rashid, can I just interrupt you there? There seems to be some sort of feedback of some sort. So it's not very clear what you're saying. I think that is better. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't know how much of it got missed, but I'm Rashid Khwaja, the Senior Trade Advisor at the British Embassy, Dubai, and I primarily focus on the construction and water sectors within the DIT team. So today I thought I would share with you a live construction opportunity which is backed by UK Export Finance, as Vinita hinted to. It's a hospitality project, five-star luxury resort being built right opposite the Burj Al Arab. And for those of you who have visited Dubai would know the location very well. It's the hotspot tourist location, and pulls in lots of crowds, primarily who would come over to enjoy the beach and take a look at the Burj Al Arab Hotel itself. So this is another luxury resort development being built on a reclaimed land, reclaimed islands, one each side of the Burj. But the development calls for building of massive luxury villas and retail centers. But for the focus of attention at the moment, I would just focus on the picture that you see, the building that you see in the slide, which is the Marsa Al Arab Hotel and the infrastructure around it. Next slide, please, Abby. Yeah, just to give you a project overview, this is a design and build project with Atkins as the design engineers. And the main contractor, which again, Vinita alluded to, I account manage, is a local contracting company called Al Shafa General Contracting, or ASGC. The total value of the project in dirhams is around 1.4 billion. And it is, as I mentioned earlier, situated in the Jumeirah part of Dubai. Next slide, please, Abby. Yes, as you can see, I mean, it is a 400 room hotel with 98 hotel apartments. with lots of pools and landscaping around it. And there are a few other contractors involved together with the ASGC, but they're mainly the scope of work is outside the main building area around landscaping and the development works. In terms of the timelines, no, if you can go back to the previous slide, yes. In terms of the timelines, as you can see, the design work commenced in February 2019. Enabling works and early construction work was started off in June 2019, and construction started in October 2019. And all of this flowed quite nicely until we hit the COVID period this year in March. And as expectedly, there were some delays in terms of design work and the initial procurement that was required for the project. But I've been advised by the contractor that there's nothing of any massive scale, so no major disruptions so far. And ASGC are committed to be able to finish off the project as committed by March 2022. Next slide, please. Yes, and this is a very important slide, and the exact reason for me to be picking up this project and sharing the details with you all. As I mentioned, this is a UK Export Finance backed project, and for those who may not be very familiar of UK Export Finance or how their support translates into export wins, just for the sake of very basic understanding, UK Export Finance is UK's export credit agency, and it helps exporters like you to win business in overseas markets. Now, one of the fundamental requirements of for UK Export Finance backed projects is for the contractor to be able to meet a minimum threshold of 20% of UK content in that project. But as you can see, in this particular case, the UK content level is well over 36%, and that's what we would like to see. That in projects, the 20% threshold actually translating into much higher UK content level, and typically we have seen the content to go well over 30%. And having chats with the ASGC, they tell me by the end of the project, we could see the UK content level go well over 40%, which is great news, because this is exactly the kind of opportunities that companies like yourselves can avail through these projects. And we've been working together with colleagues back in the DIT regions, many of which are attendees of the webinar today, and indeed with devolved administrations such as the Welsh government to help facilitate companies that are interested to supply their products or services to the Marsa Hotel project and link them up with the main contractor. And to date, we have linked up over 200 SMEs from the UK into the project. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that all 200 companies would walk away with a contract, but certainly get a good bite of the cherry, really, to be able to compete for various packages that the contractor is ready to share with those who show interest. Next slide, please, Debbie. And broadly speaking, these are the packages that they have broken down the project into as part of ASGC's scope of work, mainly civil and architectural and electromechanical work. So just to give you an idea in terms of the procurement timelines, ASGC are currently, finishing off 3 mock design rooms as sample rooms, each with a different design for final selection by the client. And once the final design is selected, then they will kickstart the procurement process, and that'll come into full swing. So by the end of this month, we expect ASGC to be moving into full procurement mode, and it would be around the civil and architectural packages, and the electromechanical works is a bit further in terms of timelines. So you can expect the MEP packages to be rolled out in Q1 2022. And I mentioned that we've already introduced over 200 companies to ASGC to date, but they are keen to reach out to more. And the reason being their engagement with UK companies, not limited to the Marsa Al Arab project alone. They are also working on 2 other UCAF-backed projects in Dubai, and they are keen to take, to move yourselves or companies that register with them to the to other projects in Dubai, and indeed in some of the other markets outside the UAE, like Africa, that they are currently involved with. So, and it's a very simple way of getting involved with the project. Abby, next slide, please. All you have to do is to register at this link that will take you to the ASGC portal. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, Rashid, go on. We can hear you.
Page that is shown on the right-hand side that will ask you to fill in some basic company details. So all UK EF would require from ASGC is to ascertain that they are dealing with UK registered suppliers. So, this is a basic assessment that ASGC would require. And of course, the details of your products and services that you specialize in. And then, they will obviously acknowledge your interest in the project, and based on your product speciality, share the relevant package details with you for both technical and otherwise for you to send in a proposal. So I would strongly suggest all interested in hospitality projects such as the Marsa Al Arab project to please register on this website and make use of this opportunity, which is live and kicking, and indeed with some of the other projects that they are currently building in Dubai. So for any updates and any other queries that you might have, do feel free to contact your local the international trade advisor in your region, or do reach out to me direct or to Vinita, because many of you might require setting up a base over here, and that's where the BCB can be very helpful. Or there could be a route to direct suppliers into the project. And I'll be very happy to introduce you to a point of contact within the procurement team over there to progress your queries and potentially your bids in the project. Thank you very much. Over to you, Vinita.
Well, thank you very much for that, Rashid. I mean, I can't stress enough on what a great opportunity this is actually for a lot of UK companies who don't probably have the bandwidth to set up here locally, but this is a sort of a relatively easy way into this sector. I mean, a pretty prestigious project to be a part of as well when you're starting off here in the UAE. So please do make the most of the opportunity that Rashid was referring to. It is, like Rashid said, as simple as clicking on that link to get yourself registered and to be within the books of Al Shafar General Contracting, again, a prominent contracting company in this part of the world. So what I'm going to do that is we have run over time and then almost 15 minutes over time here, but I will try and take a few questions, and if your questions have not been answered, we will look to, like I said towards the beginning of the webinar, collate those questions and answer to you in as much detail as possible. We're obviously open to you know uh, uh, phone calls and emails, so please feel free to write into us if we have missed any of the questions. Rashid, if I can bring you in, there is I had raised this earlier about in country value, ICV, which is becoming more and more important as we go forward, especially if you're looking to engage with government entities. I have a question here from Patrick Thorpe, who says, who has asked if it's possible to speak a little bit more about the rules applied to ICV score, and and within the tendering process, what are the strategies used by bidders to optimize their score? Would you be able to talk on this?
Yeah, no, I can certainly make an attempt. I think this ICV requirement is primarily for Abu Dhabi, and it is their way of trying to support the local SME market in Abu Dhabi by mandating through government contracts to make use of a certain percentage of local content in tenders over there. So, the big boys like the ADNOC in Abu Dhabi, they've got a mandated ICV requirement for all their tenders. And it is all about, I believe, UK suppliers in our case, to be teaming up with local SMEs over there and meeting up this requirement through them. So yeah, I mean, it's more in Abu Dhabi than you experience in Dubai.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Rashid. I will take the next question from Mark Ellis, who has, again, looks like an experienced and seasoned exporter to the UAE. But his question is more around the sort of the comeback of KSA onto the construction scene. And this is, again, something that Colin had touched upon earlier on in the webinar, where, and the question is, will KSA now be the main focus specifically within this sector going forward? Colin, could you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, my expectation is that Saudi Arabia will be the most active construction market going forward for the next 4 or 5 years. There's partly, largely just due to slightly different economic cycles. There's a lot of very big projects there that are at the early stage, whereas in the UAE, the bigger projects are coming or closing out stage. So it's a little bit of cycles, but a lot of them are moving into construction now. So I expect there's going to be an increasing number of awards over the next couple of years.
Right. Thanks, Colin. I have another question here from Greg, who's talking about his product and wants to know how to go about speaking to major players in the UAE about this innovative product that they have developed. I guess I can take this question, Greg. So we do essentially that. I mean, we have the capacity and the capability to provide B2B matchmaking services here in the UAE. As you may have heard from Peter earlier on, the best way to going about speaking to major players is essentially through someone who knows the right person. And you must understand that here in the UAE, because it is UAE, everybody's knocking on their doors. So do not expect to hear back if you're reaching out to them on emails, to be perfectly honest. I myself have found uh, telling the very many UK companies that we work with that WhatsApp, as a matter of fact, is almost an accepted means of business communication here. So if you have their mobile numbers, then you're more likely to get a response or a reaction if you were to WhatsApp them rather than send them an email, which it's probably unthinkable back in the UK, but very much a normal business practice. here in the UAE. But obviously, you have to establish that connection initially through face-to-face meetings. Now, probably not so much, but back in the day, and again, always it is a region that takes up a fair amount of your time and energy, but almost always gold for the ones who crack it. I have another question from Graham, who has asked if it's possible to get the contact details for ASGC. Yes, quite possible. Rashid here should be able to help you with that. So please feel free to reach out to Rashid, who will be able to help you there. We again have a few questions around ICV and PPP, but we'll probably leave that for some of our follow-up workshops, which we are planning to organize over the next few weeks. So we're looking to run a few workshops in the first week of December. And because I see a sort of a theme repeating through these questions, we'll look to cover that in our following workshops. So please make sure that you're speaking to your ITAs in your regions, and they should be able to give you more details on what the next steps should look like. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're really way past our time now. So I will have to close here, but a very big thank you to all the speakers and for all the information that you have shared here with us. And a very big thank you to all the attendees. Thank you for taking your time out and joining us today. We hope you have found this useful. As you can see, you will see all of our contact details on that last slide. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to take questions from then on. Thank you very much once again, and I am concluding the webinar here. You will be receiving links to this webinar shortly. Thank you.